Two stragglers. Because they know we're here. The door is in the building.
Okay.
Good to go? Yeah.
Good morning and welcome everyone to the SECC for our first session at the gathering, a collaboration between Foundation Scotland and the charity regulator OSCR. It's a pleasure to be here on a number of fronts, but mainly to see people in person. I think we've had a long couple of years, but it's great to be in a room hearing people having various chats, but also that there's so many sessions on this morning that you've made the decision to come to this session to hear about revitalising lost trusts. On my left here I have two people that have been painted in the press, certainly the SCVO press, as the Indiana Jones setup of this project, and I have to say it really is like working with Indiana Jones on a daily basis. They're doing a fantastic job. It's my job just to give you a brief introduction before I hand to my colleague Martin from OSCR to tell you where this project came from and the direction of travel. This came through a number of conversations between colleagues at Foundation Scotland and colleagues at OSCR a number of years ago, based on some work that had been done in England between UKCF and the charity regulator in England, where they looked at organisations, trusts that hadn't been active for a while, and they reckoned that the very reason they hadn't been active, they must have assets, and if they hadn't been active in using their assets, then surely there was money that could be revitalised and used for the sector. So thankfully the conversations in Scotland moved on, I wouldn't say pretty quickly, they've probably taken 5 or 6 years, but we take 2 off for the pandemic. And we've gotten to a place where we now have a project team headed up by Steph, working alongside Steve, and we're using this unique partnership between OSCR and the skills that they bring and Foundation Scotland, the skills that we bring, looking at how we can revitalise some of these trusts for Scotland and make some of this money available for the original use that the trust intended, or can they be used in another way just to get them into the sector. I'm not going to take any more of your time. I'm going to pass over to Martin, who'll tell you a little bit more about the partnership, but it's lovely to see you all and I hope you enjoy your day. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, so really just to talk a little bit more about where we've gone with this work. From OSCR's point of view, this is something really exciting. Obviously, we work a lot with the sector, but this is the first time that we've worked in this more formal way with a sector partner to move forward something that's part of our statutory role, and it's for us it's been a really fruitful collaboration. Chris has mentioned the model of what was done in England and Wales. Obviously, we are doing that slightly differently. There was central funding for that, and we've have had to be sort of slightly more manoeuvrable around that. But I think that's been a really sort of fruitful way of working. We've looked with a lot of interest at the way this work's also being taken forward in Wales and now, and I think in the different parts of Ireland as well. And it's good to see that going forward. Although we started off with looking at the English model, we've adjusted our approach a bit to take into account the different demographics of the sector in Scotland. I think that will come out really interestingly in what Steph and Steve have to say. I think also the fact that we've got a single community foundation that's working here on this. The other thing I just want to mention, because it's again been a really valuable part of it for the project, is the external reference group that we've got who serve as critical friends for the project, and that involves people from Scottish Government's Third Sector Unit, it involves SCVO, the Law Society's Charity Law Subcommittee, and the Cora Foundation, and that's been really valuable in I think keeping us on the right track and giving us a sounding board for the approach that we've used. I think that's probably all I want to say. I think there's a sort of a lot of really good stuff in what Steve and Steph are going to tell you about it, and really look forward to hearing that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chris and Martin. I'm not sure whether I'm Indiana Jones or Steph is, but I kind of feel we've shortchanged you a bit this morning by not turning up in fancy dress. I think it was actually in that article in TFN that the term lost trusts was used for the first time, because we hadn't been using that word before. We'd been calling them sleepy trusts and dormant trusts and all kinds of things. And I think one of the things we've actually learned through the first kind of operational phase of the project is that, in fact, most of the trusts aren't lost. We just haven't been looking very hard for them, and now we are finding them. Some of them aren't active, but they're certainly, we may have mislaid them temporarily, but they're not actually lost. I'm going to speak just briefly this morning about some of the kind of rationale behind the project and the methodology, how why we're doing it and how we're going about doing it, and then I will hand over to Steph, who's going to be doing most of the kind of heavy lifting, I think, with it's a bit of fashionable phrase, isn't it? Sort of deep dive into some of the what she's been finding from the initial contact. It's Steph that does the bulk of the work on the project, and then perhaps more interestingly, some of the case studies. Some examples, if you like, of what we've come up with over the past 6 months, since the project really became operational, which was in September, I think, last year, that we first made contact with the first batch of trusts. So why are we doing it? What's the project about? Well, the primary aim is to try and root out to locate underactive or inactive trusts that are holding on to trust funds that are unused or underused, and to try and find out why. What are the obstacles to them using these funds, and then to work with the trustees of those funds to find ways of unlocking them so that they can be put back into effective use that provides public benefit. It is a requirement of all charities on the charity register that they actively provide public benefit, so OSCR has a regulatory interest in that. But I think the key here very much is about working with the trustees of these funds. We've been very keen, I think, to stress throughout the project that we want, as far as is possible, the trustees to retain control over this process. We want to work with them to support them. In all of the news releases we've put out, in all of the FAQs on our respective websites, even in the initial contact letters that go out to the trusts, we have been very careful to not to use sort of pejorative language. I think we're keen to stress that this is intended to be a facilitative project. It's not a punitive one. We're not about naming and shaming trusts here, although I think it's fair to say that some of them have been a little ashamed actually when we've contacted them. But that's not the purpose here. We're not trying to punish anyone. We're trying to work with them to find solutions to the obstacles. And the assumption that we begin with is that they are well intentioned, but they have encountered obstacles that are preventing them from using the funds as the original settlers intended. And there is I suppose, by keeping trustees at the centre of this, what we're also very keen to ensure is that whatever solutions are arrived at, their wishes and their commitment often to the spirit of and some of the trustees have a very strong sense of personal loyalty to the wishes of the original donors, the original settlers here. They wish to ensure that the funds continue to be used in the spirit of that original intention. And their cooperation with the project has often been expressed in terms that are conditional on that basis. They say, we will work with you on the understanding that you don't just take this out of our control, if you like. And I'm conscious that there's quite a number of you listening today who are fundraisers, and I think there has been, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I think there has been some misconception about the project that OSCR will somehow be confiscating these funds or commandeering these funds, that there will be a pot of money that you can bid for. And that's not really the case. I mean, certainly the examples we've come up with so far, where the trust is going to be wound up or amalgamated or the funds are going to be transferred, it's very much the wishes of we're working with the trustees on their wishes. Whether those funds are transferred to another trust of their wish, or whether it's being transferred to, as has been the case with a couple so far, to Foundation Scotland, it will still be within a kind of client-managed fund, if you like, that the trustees continue to sort of exercise influence over. So it's possible, but we're not imagining that there will be a kind of open pot of money, if you like, that will be available for other trusts to sort of bid into. And the other thing, which we will come back to perhaps to say there, is that a lot of the trusts we're encountering, well, to start with, they're very small, the amounts of money they have are small, but also they're very locally based, and they're kind of community based as well, and the intention is very much that the money stays but is put to good use within that very specific locality. The other kind of added value in this for OSCR, if you like, is about the register. OSCR has a function to maintain a public register of charities and to ensure that register is accurate and up to date. And we have a corporate objective around ensuring the Scottish Charity Register only contains active charities that are providing public benefit. That's not just purely an administrative exercise. There's a wider purpose behind that, which is about public trust and confidence. It's important that anybody, the register is one of the most sort of public-facing things we do in many ways, and it's important that anybody accessing that register can do so with confidence that those charities are deserving, I suppose, of their continued entry in the register. Why are we working together on this? Well, I think it's a combination, if you like, of the kind of regulatory weight that OSCR brings to this. We, as I say, we have a statutory function to maintain an accurate register. We also have formal powers, if need be, to make inquiries into charities, and we have powers to grant consent to some of the changes or to approve reorganisation schemes that will be necessary to bring about some of the improvements that are needed for some of these charities. But that is combined with the particular expertise that Foundation Scotland brings to the project in terms of their reach into communities and their ability to connect and their experience of connecting donors with communities that need funds, and their skills in assisting trustees through processes of improvement and change. And that combination of our sort of regulatory weight with Foundation Scotland's community reach has been one of the sort of key benefits of this collaboration. It's important, I think, that because OSCR does, in some of these cases, have to make formal regulatory decisions, that we are detached from the support and advice side of things, so that we're not fettering our discretion when it comes to making formal regulatory decisions. So why trusts? Why are we focusing? I mean, charitable trusts, after all, only make up a relatively small portion of the register. I haven't got the exact figures to hand, but I think there are around about 3,500 trusts on the register, so that's no more than about 14-15% of the total register. And of course, the ones that we're interested in is actually a much smaller number than that. So why not look at all charities? Well, it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that in later down the line, as the project develops, we could move into other legal forms. But we've concentrated on trusts to begin with, following the model that's been adopted in England and Wales, because for a number of reasons. Partly because charitable trusts by legal form tend to be among the older charities on the register. We do still register new trusts, but many of the ones we have on the register are much older. It's been a fascinating journey, actually, looking at trust deeds that are kind of written in copperplate writing that date back to the 18th century and whatever. I've been learning quite a bit of Latin and Old Scots legalese through this process. Some of the trust deeds are missing completely, some of them are incomplete, some of them are pretty much illegible or unintelligible, frankly. So that in itself has been an interesting exercise. And they were typically, charitable trusts provide public benefit not by directly running services and activities themselves, but by using those funds to give grants or in some cases loans, either to other charities or community organisations or to individual beneficiaries. So if they're not spending their money, then there is a reasonable starting assumption that they're not providing public benefit. Because some of these trusts are very old, we are coming. Some of them. There is a risk that they're out of date. Their purposes are no longer relevant. We're coming across trusts where the purpose, the activity has been to give a bag of coal once a year to people who live in the parish of Kelso, who are indigent spinsters whose name is MacDonald. And finding beneficiaries in the 21st century. Well, to start with, we're coming across purposes that are no longer charitable. We're coming across conditions attached to those purposes that are unduly restricted, possibly unlawful, certainly not meeting equality legislation, irrelevant, and no longer capable of being fulfilled. And very often the settlers of those trusts back in the 18th, 19th centuries did not envisage a time when the social conditions would no longer make those purposes irrelevant. So they didn't make provision within the trust deed themselves for future-proofing. There is, and unlike other legal forms where the ability to make changes to the purposes, to modernise the constitutions in other ways, rests with the trustees themselves or the members. Very often within older trusts there is no provision for amendment beyond, they can amend administrative things, but the dispositive powers that they have over how to use the trust funds are fixed. So the only way they can amend those, we can't give consent in those cases because we cannot consent to trustees doing things that they don't have the power to do. So in those circumstances, the only thing they can do is apply to us or potentially the Court of Session for approval of a scheme of reorganisation. And that's where one of our formal functions as part of this project comes in. So by working with trusts, we are working with organisations where the ability to make the changes they need in order to modernise and improve things don't rest entirely within their own hands. Many of these trusts also are very small, so they have limited resources to spend on legal fees, etc., or other things, and that again is where the value of working with Foundation Scotland comes in, because Steph, it doesn't prejudice the trustees from taking advice from elsewhere, but it does mean that Steph can offer them support on developing options, and if need be, drawing up the schemes, etc., without them incurring costs. What do we mean by inactive? Well, we developed 3 broad criteria to begin with, and this is based upon annual return data that the trusts have provided to us over their last 5 reporting periods. So it's a horizontal study over a period of 5 years. If they have failed in that time to submit accounts or returns to us, or if they've reported 0 income and 0 expenditure over that time, or their total expenditure during that 5-year period has been less than 30% of their total income during the same period, then they fall within our long list data set, if you like. We will own up to the fact that they're pretty crude measures. Certainly the last of those, we've been questioned, where does the 30% come from, for example? Where in law does it say that a charity must spend 30% of its income to demonstrate public benefit? Well, it doesn't. It doesn't say that. It's a kind of reasonableness test, I suppose, if you like. It's kind of, if we stopped that proverbial creature, the man or woman in the street, and said to them, if a charity is only spending 30% of its income, what would you think about that? Would you think that was sufficient? So it's kind of it's based on that. The other thing I suppose to say is that is 30% of total expenditure. Now, that doesn't even narrow it down to 30% expenditure on charitable activities. That will include governance costs and expenditure on non-charitable activities too. It's a crude measure, and that's because the majority of these charities are very small. They have an annual income of under £25,000 a year. The annual return data we get for them is very basic. We don't, on the annual return questions they send back to us, they're not asked to give a breakdown of those costs and those expenditure. And that's where Steph's work, doing the kind of deep dive into looking at their accounts for the past 5 years, to try and tease out the reasons and the story behind that becomes important. So, as I say, we draw up a long list. The data set for that is done by our research team internally. We refresh that data set every couple of months, and that's because it's a fairly dynamic thing. Accounts and returns are coming in from charities all the time. We want to make sure we're working with current data and we're not contacting trusts unnecessarily. Each time we refresh that data set, there's around about 240, 250 trusts that come up on that search. And it does change. There are ones that come in, ones that drop off, which in itself indicates the reason for refreshing that data periodically. The next phase is to hand it over to Steph. She looks at all of the accounting information, the annual reports, etc., that we've had in from those trusts for the past 5 years, to see if we can, from that, establish a reason for their apparent inactivity. In some cases, we've been able to eliminate, because in fact, when you look at it, they're not inactive. They've perhaps entered wrongly information on their annual returns. In some cases, reasons for periods of inactivity are apparent just from looking at the purposes. If a trust is set up to provide disaster relief, for example, in a particular part of the world, and there thankfully hasn't been a disaster in the past 5 years, then they've been accumulating funds with no spend. And we don't need to contact them in those cases because it's self-evident. Likewise, if the trustees themselves, in their narrative, in the trustees' annual report, have provided an explanation for why they're accumulating funds for a period, perhaps they've got a big project in mind, then that may account for it. But what we're whittling it down to is the ones where there is evidence of inactivity and there is no obvious explanation provided for that. And they're the ones that we then make contact. So we draw up a short list, if you like. We then make initial contact with them, and the initial contact letter goes from OSCR. That's partly because we want to make it absolutely clear that this isn't cold calling, this isn't Foundation Scotland, using this as an opportunity to grab funds. So the initial contact letter explains to them what the project is, how we will use that data, and how we're using the data, and what they must do next. So what options do they have? Well, they can come back to us and say, well, you've got it wrong. We are active. In some cases, we've had ones come back and say, well, we are active. We just haven't told you because we haven't sent our accounts in for the past few years. Here's our accounts. And we have had a number now. I had one just last week that provided me with 8 years' worth of accounts all on one day. So they're back on track. And that in itself is an outcome. It's a result. They can confirm that they are inactive, and they can provide us with an acceptable improvement plan. Sometimes they've got, particularly over the last couple of years, there have been periods of inactivity for pretty good reasons. They can come back to us with their plans for trying to attract new beneficiaries and so forth. They can confirm that they're inactive and say, well, actually, we've come to the end of the road with this. We're going to wind up. We either have no remaining funds, or we want to transfer them. Or they can confirm to us, and some of these things are not mutually exclusive. They can do a number of these things. They can confirm that they'd like to be referred to Foundation Scotland, who will then work with them to consider the options. So, as I say, most of the trusts that we've encountered so far are small. 78% of them have an annual income of under £25,000 a year. Most of them were established by some sort of bequest or legacy, so there are very personal wishes often of the original settlers to consider. They tend to be the more traditional, older charitable purposes, so it's relief of poverty, advancement of education, advancement of health, when the more modernly expressed purposes, which of course only came in with the 2005 Act, such as animal welfare, for example, we don't tend to see so many of those. The majority of them have a Scotland. We have had a couple that are UK-wide, one that's been overseas only, but the vast majority of them have a Scotland-only focus, and getting on for half, 44% of them have a very local community focus to them. They are distributed very unevenly throughout Scotland. Steph will give you a slide in a minute that's got a bit more, gives a breakdown of that. And we've also encountered a significant number of those, more than 50, that are managed by local authorities, where the local authority is the corporate trustee. We've set those to one side at the moment because we're working on a sort of separate side project for how we address those, because there's not much point writing to one local authority with a dozen different letters about separate funds. So we're going to approach that differently. And at that point, I will hand over to Steph.
Hi everyone. I'm hoping my voice holds out. I've only just got my voice back 3 days ago, so I do have an interpreted dance version of this that I might bust out. So as Steve was saying, what we're uncovering here is largely small trusts, and as we've identified, they are mostly unevenly distributed across Scotland. So I'm glad that's so big, because that writing was tiny. So what we've got there is a kind of list by principal contact. So this is where these trusts are registered. Now, it's a little bit misleading, because what we've got here, as you'd expect, which is in keeping actually with the register in general, is that we've got, the bulk of them being registered in Glasgow, in Fife and Edinburgh. But because these are principal contact registrations and not in the main trustee registrations, that some of these are actually registered in Edinburgh, but they may well be actually set up to provide for in Orkney or in the Western Isles. It's actually where the principal contact is. And it's related to quite often that a lot of these are professionally managed trusts. So it might be that the professional advisor is actually based in that area. And in terms of the income, I think we're sensing a pattern here. It's small, it's local. But the vast majority of our long list, if you like, are sitting with their income of under 25,000. What I would say with that as well is that the 25,000, again, is actually, most of these are nowhere near that. We're talking income of a few £100, sometimes bank interest of £15, maybe once a year. So we're very much talking low level. But it's important to remember as well is that the income is a little bit, again, of a red herring, because what we don't know is what the assets are within these charities until we've deep dived into those accounts. So what's difficult here for my work is that I have this long list, and I have the standard columns of information from the register that presents the pictures in this way, but deep diving into these is a completely different picture. The higher income ones up there, so do have some, I have a very small handful there of trusts that are, over, sort of the sort of 100 to 500,000. Again, it's a little bit of a red herring, because quite often what's happened here is it's trusts that have had a large donation. These are usually the trusts that are not that old, so they're probably in the sort of 5 to 10 to 15 to 20-year-old trusts that have had a large amount settling into the trust. And actually what that's done is just skew the expenditure. So actually, again, these higher income trusts tend to be ones where actually the spend rate's not that bad. It's just that it's been skewed because they got a large donation one year. The vast majority of these that have actually ended up providing a rationale as well. So this long green line at the bottom is my work for the next year and maybe beyond as well. So in terms of what we've done so far, as Steve mentioned, we have the project largely got going in around September or October time. That was because there was the project lead-in, we were looking at things like monitoring assessments, having a really robust framework for the project, and tackling, actually we've not mentioned this, but tackling the slight problem of data protection, which meant that documentation for trusts had to be very clearly checked and redacted before they were sent to me for assessment. So I didn't actually get any documents till around September time, mid-September, which was when I started assessing these trusts. But we've assessed over 135 now. So I had a very pleasant time with the first few months of literally just looking at accounts for the best part of 30 hours a week, which I don't recommend, to be honest. But it's fascinating as well. As a journey, it's really, really fascinating. And so from that, we've rationalised that down into batches of trusts that we contacted. And we've now contacted 66 trusts since, I think it's end of September that we've done that. We've still got 116 to go. Actually, probably half of those are sort of assessed and waiting to go into batches of letters to go out. But from that list of initial 66 that we've contacted, we've had 15 of those trusts that have been referred to me at Foundation Scotland to work with. We've got 11 that are working directly with OSCR. That's usually because, actually, as Steve's mentioned, we've contacted, when they've been contacted, the trusts themselves have said, actually, we know what we need to do, we just never get around to doing it. And so they've worked out a plan with OSCR to either wind up or to enter into a reorg or what have you. We've got, from those contacts, we've got 8 trusts that have either wound up already as a result of the project or are about to go through that consent process. And as we predicted, which was, we're never going to get 100% record, but we've still got 12 trusts that are eluding us, that are not responding to several attempts for contact. They won't be let off the hook. We will track them down. It's a bit like Taken, isn't it? But Liam Neeson, that's another moniker I give myself, Liam Neeson. So these won't go unnoticed. We will find a way. So from the desk research, so this was a fun time, and it will continue to be a fun time for me for a little while longer. My role has been to take a deep dive into accounts and into trust deeds. And what I find, for those of you might have seen, we've written about this publicly, but one of the first things we started to notice was the varying degree of quality of the annual accounts that we were looking at. Now, bearing in mind that this is where we go to find the rationale, this is where we go and try and find out what these trusts are doing or have not been doing. And it's safe to say there was a broad spectrum of what we could find, everything from, one page or back of a fag packet type of thing, right way to really thorough, beautifully written, really good narrative accounts. And from there, it really did show that actually some trusts were really on it. Some trusts were reporting that actually, we're struggling, we don't know what to do. Or some trusts had actually said, we're talking about closing. And some trusts actually, what they do is put the same sentence in every 5 years and actually hadn't done anything at all. And from there, looking at the accounts, we'd also be looking at the trustees. And as Steve's mentioned, what a variety of trustees we found. There is a real mix. Again, from a very interesting historical point of view, it's fascinating, finding out all these weird and wonderful trusts and purposes. But again, what's actually been quite nice is for those trusts that we did have missing documents for, or perhaps it had been folded over when it had been photocopied and you're missing a clause. Actually, once we've made contact with trusts, they've been able to pull them out for us. They've dusted off the cabinet in the attic and actually found the trust. So we've actually pulled out some nice new documents as well. So the principal thing here, what we were looking for, is that reason for activity. As we've said, we didn't want to be contacting trusts unnecessarily. So what we were looking for then, what we thought we'd find, which is what we have found, is a mix of purposes being irrelevant and restrictive for trusts. I'll give you some examples when I talk about case studies in a minute. So that was principally one of the main things we were finding, is that trusts were locked into these purposes and they didn't know what to do. What we're finding from conversations with trustees themselves is quite often trustees themselves, they were struggling to find people to join their board of trustees to enact, to make changes. Quite often we're finding trusts with just one trustee left. Sometimes they're often ex officio. So ex officio is where trustees are appointed by the virtue of the office that they hold. So quite often we're finding trusts where the ex officio office no longer exists and they're effectively sat there without trustees. As we've mentioned before as well, in relation to the trustees, often these deeds have missing provisions in them that locked these trustees into not being able to, to make any changes as well. So things like not having a dissolution clause or not having a clause that allows them to amend their purposes, or only able to spend income and not capital, which is something that we've come up quite a lot with. And sort of linked to that, we were finding that sometimes there was sort of poorly managed funds. Interestingly, what we found, the vast majority of trusts that I've read into, these trusts have often had powers, more often than not had powers to invest money that they've been, the sort of capital that they've been settled with. And actually, quite a significant number of these trusts have never invested that money, even though they've had the power to do so. So what's happened is that we've got a number of trusts where they had some money settled with it 15, 20 years ago, but they never got around to investing it. So, and in terms of the other things that we've started to, the one thing actually that I have missed off here because I don't want to start it right is banking. So anyone that's had the experience of trying to change a bank signatory for their charity will know what I mean. That is another stumbling block for a lot of the trusts. I'm getting a lot of nods. Another issue that we found. One of the things to note here is, as well, is that we've noticed, and Steve, we kind of alluded to this already, is that there is a wide variation of governance costs that we've noted as well. When we're talking about governance costs, I'm talking in addition to independent examination fees and investment management. Specifically, we're talking about costs for the management of the trusts themselves. And as I'll come on to, the vast majority of these trusts are not managed by trustees per se, they're managed by professional advisors. And we are seeing a wide variety of what they're being charged from professional advisors not charging anything at all for several trusts they're looking after, right their way up to a lot without any real explanation as to why. And as I've mentioned, the income here is not a reliable indication of the asset, which makes our job a little bit harder because it's hard to know which ones to really go after. If we're talking about trying to release funds back into working again, what's difficult is the fact that I could look, so for example, batch 6 of trusts that I looked at a couple of months ago, where I had 10 trusts that were listed as having a zero income. Once I delved into those annual accounts, what I find it ranged from a few pounds to over £65,000 in one case. So the income and the assets, it can't be married up until I've actually deep dived into them. So in terms of, did I go too fast there? No. So in terms of what happens next, we've done all this research, we've made an assessment whether they're suitable for contact, and as we've mentioned, there's real care taken to that. We're not contacting trusts unnecessarily. And I think we're quite pleased with this, but we've had an 80% respond rate from the trusts that we've contacted, and actually 72% of those are getting back to us within the first attempt. We have numerous attempts, believe me, but 72% of those are getting back to us within that 4 week. The reactions and the responses to contact varies, we'll say. It's a mix of, we're mostly positive, it is mostly positive, but we've had everything from very defensive, outrage, we've had an outrage, we've had defensive, we've had very thankful, actually the vast majority of the thing, the trusts, certainly the ones that I'm working with, have been really thankful that there's been this there for them because actually they've hit a brick wall years ago and didn't know where to turn. So reactions have been mixed, but mostly positive, which we're pleased about. The pace of communication, however, is a bit of a stumbling block. We've mentioned there that we refer to these trusts often as lost, but we've also referred to them as sleepy, and sometimes it can be a little bit like rousing a teenager. There is, because they've been sleepy or dormant, or however you want to describe them, for quite a while, they're not quick. Often these trusts are not quick to respond. And if you couple that with the fact that a lot of these trusts, when they were active, were quite only active once or twice a year anyway, because that's the only time they actually provided their service of grant giving. So trustees, in the nature of the one we're working with, are tending to be a bit slow. And linked to the next point, the other thing here is that actually because the majority of the principal contacts we have for these trusts, as I mentioned, are not charity trustees. So we only have one contact for these trusts. And as we mentioned, most of these are professional advisors. So what happens there is that we then have a relay effect of where we're contacting a trust through their professional advisor. They say, well, go away and speak to our trustees. Oh, I think the trustees are meeting in June, so we'll wait 2 months. You know, so it's sometimes a relay as well as trying to actually get to the trustees themselves. So there is a pace issue here, which is slightly frustrating for me because I just want to get going. But I understand we have to be really mindful that actually these trustees are taking time and to consider what their options are. So when they're contacted, they do then have the option of either dealing directly with OSCR. As I said, they quite often know what they want to do, and so that's straight, you know, communicate with OSCR. Or they say, actually, yes, we do, we would like some support, and then they're referred to me at Foundation Scotland. So here's a money bit. So from the ones that we've worked with so far, it is a mixed bag of trusts that we're working with, and those are currently, so we've got just over 30 there when we know what outcome they're either met or about to meet, or in the process of. For those of you that have ever done a reorganisation, it's a very, very long process. It's several weeks, if not months of work. So the outcome there has not been met, but it's in the pipeline, so to speak. So what we've got on the right-hand column there is a sort of cumulative total funds of assets of those trusts that we're revitalising. So we've got the first ones up there, which are reactivating or fulfilling activities themselves. So that's been, on communication from the project. They've said, actually, yes, we intended to do this, but we haven't done it. Or actually, yes, we did have a plan that we were going to merge with another charity, and we were going to merge the assets and keep going that way. So a lot of these ones are ones where reactivation is happening off their own back. But you'll see that the majority of trusts, there's 15 trusts there that are actually either spending up and winding up, or they're going to transfer to another body and wind up. And you'll notice the difference there between asset value. These are tending to be the smaller end of charitable trusts that have never really perhaps gotten going. We've got several trusts that actually never really had any assets to begin with, that maybe ended up with £1,200 in the bank, and actually they just need to wind up and transfer it on. And then we've got 3 trusts that are considering alternative management options as well. So that's trusts that are considering, do we want to keep going, or do we want to have this managed elsewhere? So the case studies. I've got 4 case studies here, which I'll try and time-wise rattle through. But what I wanted to do is to give you a picture of, I guess, the diversity of the trusts that we're working with, and the different approaches that some of these trusts are saying, that are going through, and what we're doing to support them. This has been a real part of the job that I was looking forward to doing, because my 10 years up to this point has all been working with trustees, and this is one of the reasons that attracted me to doing the work, was about supporting trustees, because my personal view is that trustees are the lost art of volunteering and often don't get support when they need it most. So this first trust was an inactive trust that was a legacy that had been left to a church, and it was set up to provide financial support to young people in their chosen vocation. It was inactive from the point of view that actually the trust had not been able to provide any public benefit in furtherance of its purposes, but it had been reporting, and in the annual reports that I'd seen, they'd actually said, we're struggling to find young people to actually give this to, because the purposes were so narrow. The purposes were narrow from the point of view of the age range was I think it was 4 years. They had 21 to 25 was the age range, but also that they had to have had a connection to the church in some way, and they were finding with their congregation that they weren't really finding young people. The trustee also specifically prohibited changing the purposes, so it did have some clauses that allowed them to do changes, but it actually stipulated that they couldn't change the purposes. And also the trust had been settled, I think it was probably about 15 or 16 years old. It had been settled with an amount that could have been invested. The trust had never invested the capital that they'd been settled in. But actually a bit older than this, because actually the trustee itself had a cap on how long they could accrue investment income, and they were only a few years away from doing that. So there were all these things that were stagnating this trust from doing anything. So in terms of working with those trustees, I've been working collaboratively, and most of my work is about assessing the risks with the trustees and getting them to think about what they want to achieve with their trust. So we're principally looking at the purposes. How can we widen out those purposes to ensure we're providing public benefit, but ensuring that we are, keeping in line with the spirit of what that intended legacy was. They also sought additional guidance regarding investment options as well, because they wanted to look at that as a separate thing. And we've also talked to them about maximising their income. They're actually part of a cluster of churches now, and actually thought, we could be maximising, we could be topping up this trust fund as we go through. And what's been really nice is that the result of this has been we've got a completely refreshed board. We've got 3 new trustees starting with that board as well. We're meeting next week. And we're entering into a reorganisation scheme, which is redoing the trust deed, it's future-proofing as best we can, but it's also widening out those purposes, and it's also going to include reaching out to young people because they're becoming a part of a cluster, so they want to be able to ensure that they're covering the cluster of churches that they're working with, and they're planning to relaunch the trust in autumn, which is great. So this is a really good example of where it's not just about the money, getting the money out there, it's actually about revitalising the charity as a whole and making that charity and those trustees robust and fit for purpose and with a clear direction. The second trust here is another, these are all legacy trusts by the way, the second trust here is another legacy trust which was set up for a much admired teacher of a school, and it was set up to benefit students that are entering into further education. The issue here on speaking to the trustees was that, again, the purposes are too narrow. The benefit was linked to students doing a particular subject going on to higher education. And on speaking to the head teacher, he said, we just don't get young people doing that. We've not been able to find any young people that wants to go in that direction. But they're sat with a fairly sizable amount. What can we do with it? The trustee also, the trustee provisions provided for ex officio appointments. So it stipulated indeed that it had to be the head teacher and the subject teacher that were the trustees. And anyone who's ever connected to a teacher will know they don't have time for this. The head teacher certainly, you know, when he came into post, he inherited this trust and he said, oh, what's this? So they were really struggling to even fulfill the requirements of being a charity. So they had they had limited resource and capacity to do any additional fundraising. They were struggling to find independent examiners to do their accounts, so they just stopped sending their accounts in. So again, the work we've done with them is working with those trustees, working about how can we manoeuvre to ensure that we're actually supporting young people from that school, and do you want to continue sonship reform, or do you want to try and see if there's some way that we can manage the trust, can the trust be managed without you needing to be a charity? Because they were they held their hands up and said, we have not got time to manage this charitable trust, we can't comply with the administration and regulations that's asked of us. So the result there was that the trustees decided that they wanted to wind up and actually spend down the capital over the next few years. And what we've done there is we've sought and obtained consent from OSCR to close the charity, and they're transferring that capital to Foundation Scotland, which we will hold for them. And the trustees, the ex-trustees are the teachers, and actually they're widening it out so it's more the teachers can be involved in that. They will direct the wind down spend of that trust. So again, it's about efficiency and effectiveness for the best use of that fund, but also widening out so it's actually providing public benefit to those young people. Now for balance, this is one that has not been successful yet. It's on my list. It's going to stay on my list until we get somewhere with it. This is an example of where so far we've not been successful. And it's a trust that was set up as an island-based legacy trust, set up to provide financial support to young people or adults wishing to further their education. As broad as that, I mean, that's literally almost word for word how the purposes were written. This charity was formed in 1998, so it's over 24 years old, and since that time there had been no charitable expenditure whatsoever. So not a single grant or bursary had been issued since its inception. However, the expenditure that was going out was the factorial fee to a solicitor. And this solicitor and a connected person to that solicitor were the only trustees of this trust. So from my assessment of it, there was no apparent rationale as to why there had been no activity for this trust. The purposes, from what I could see, were perfectly capable of being fulfilled. There was nothing restrictive about it. There was no reason why they couldn't be worked through. So in terms of what we've done there is we have, they were contacted in the usual way by OSCR. There was a not wholly satisfactory response from the trustee initially. This was one of the defensive ones, but they were unable to provide a rationale as to why they were being inactive, so they were forwarded on to me at Foundation Scotland. I had an initial conversation with the trustee about what their intentions were, what their plans were, what we could do, how we could help, and I was encouraged to go away and provide some plans for the trustees. That's a nice way of what was said. And from there, so basically I developed a plan of actions. I developed a plan of outcomes, potential outcomes for the trust. We talked about what support options would be available for them, and laid out everything that we could do. However, despite that, this has run cold. Despite numerous attempts from me and several follow-up emails and phone calls, I've effectively been ghosted. The trust has just not responded to me at all. So that's, I think, was February, I think, was the last time that I heard from him. So unfortunately, this one is that I'm batting this back to OSCR. This one's going to go and be assessed to see whether or not actually an inquiry should open into the trust for not, to look at why they're not providing public benefit. So I hope it's not the end of the story for this one, because this trust had several tens of thousands of pounds sat not doing anything. So there will be an outcome. I hope. So the last one I wanted to finish on is, again, a very different one, and it's a real example of where actually collaboration from different stakeholders can really be beneficial. Now, this was a trust, it's actually 3 trusts, but they were all registered with the same small law firm up in the north, and all 3 trusts had a focus in working in small rural communities. So they were focused on the relief of poverty, and 2 were focused on the advancement of health. What happened was we contacted, because all these trusts are listed in batches, and sometimes you end up with the same principal contact, but we contacted the principal contact, the law firm, about 1 trust, actually 2 trusts, and they actually came to us and said, actually we've got another trust, we haven't done anything, we don't know what to do with it, could you help us out? So these 3 trusts were being managed gratuitously by the law firm. They thankfully still had trustees attached to all of them, which was great. And what was apparent from there was, again, they were sat with a small amount of money in there, wasn't generating any income, but again, the purposes were no longer relevant in all 3 cases. And in 2 cases, actually, they'd been fulfilled, so there was nowhere for them to go. So what we've done there is, with my colleague in the communities team who's in that part of the world, we had a conversation. I then have a conversation with the local area development officer who works in that community as well. And what we've done is drawn up a list of suitable locally focused charitable organisations that have similar purposes in some way. And we're looking to identify to sort of pool this money together and split it. There's around £18,000 there now, which is going back into a very, very small rural community, which I think is a fantastic outcome. So the result of that is that we're now looking at, the trustees are now looking at those different options and working out where best to place this money to put it to good use. So that, again, is a really good example, I think, of different people coming together and actually working out what's best for, revitalising those assets locally. And what that will mean is that, as well, is that that's another 3 trusts that are off the register as well, which is another big tick in this regard. So I hope that provided you with a good sense of what we're doing and how we're working, and just just understanding that the nature of these trusts they're all individuals and they're all stories. Every single one of these usually comes from an individual that's wanted to do something positive in their community, whether that's a community of people or a local community. And actually, what's been really nice is listening and hearing about these stories with those trustees. As I'm finding, and this is hard for me, patience is really having to be the virtue that I'm working very hard on. And it is about making sure that we are respecting and giving trustees time to consider what's best for them. The trustees are still the guardians of these assets. So they're still, and even though a lot of them haven't been active for some time, they're taking time to consider it, and that's got to be respected in this regard as well. But persistence is key. I'm also learning how to be very persistent. It's not something I would be very good at normally, but we're being very persistent. And so it's a really nice project, a real privileged project to work on, because it is very much about helping people that have gotten stuck for some years. And we've had some lovely feedback from some of the trusts that have been so thankful of just having somewhere to turn to. So, Steve, I'm going to hand back over to you just for the last bit. We've got a few minutes.
Yeah, I think really just on that point, I think in persistence, the one that I was saying earlier that some of them are sort of coming up with improvement plans. Well, they don't get off the hook with that. We are now starting to go back to some of the ones and say, well, how are you getting on with that? 6 months ago, you told us that you had a new plan in place for attracting beneficiaries. Tell us what progress you've made on that, and we will keep on doing that. They're not getting all, with the exception of the generic opening letter they get from us. After that, it's all personal correspondence. We're on first name terms with a lot of them. It's actually much harder to ignore correspondence that comes in personally, I think, whereas some of the previous sort of non-submission general letters that they get issued through OSCR Online, etc., tend to be automated. It's easier to put those to one side. But once we've hooked onto a name and we're speaking to them personally, it's much more difficult for them to wriggle out of it. I think really I said at the outset that a lot of these trusts are not lost. We've mislaid them, and I think it's really engagement is a two-way process. We're expecting them to communicate with us, but we also have to communicate with them. And I think with some of these trusts, particularly the ones that have been non-submitting for a number of years, because of the idiosyncrasies of OSCR Online, if they have stopped sending accounts one year, they fall off the system, if you like. It hasn't generated sufficient reminders in subsequent years that their annual returns are overdue. So we've had some where they've not been submitting for what I said at the outset. 8 years it hadn't been submitting. When I spoke to them about it, they said, well, nobody's asked us for accounts. And that's because 8 years ago we would have asked them, but of course they've then dropped off the system. But it has been blood and stones in some cases. I think we've gone back 7 or 8 times with some of these charities saying, you said you would get accounts to me by the end of the month. Where are they? Still haven't got them. We've got a long, growing list of fascinating excuses for why they're late. But it is paying dividends. It is resource intensive. It does take a lot of regulatory time for sometimes comparatively small amounts of money. There's a separate question, I suppose, there about the public purse and whether it's good investment of a regulator's time to be chasing comparatively small amounts of money. But it is demonstrating that it can produce results. In terms of the year ahead, we're starting to develop ideas with the reference group that Martin referred to earlier about ways in which we might take the project into other areas in the future. But certainly for the year ahead, now that we've got the momentum of the project going, for the next year, Steph will be completing the assessments and agreeing with us the trusts that we're going to take forward from the remaining ones to be assessed. So we should have, we hope to have completed the contact with all of the charities in the data set within probably the next few months, I would imagine. But then, as Steph said, there's quite a long process there of actually bringing some of these plans to fruition, of processing the reorganisation schemes, etc. So a lot of that work will be going on over the next 12 months. And as I say, we will be monitoring the progress on these improvement plans. And now that we've re-established contact with these trusts, we don't want to lose them again, so we will be keeping the dialogue going with them. Thank you all very much for listening.